The Dharma is that which is beneficial in truth. And it's only beneficial because it's true, and it's only true because it is beneficial. And this is something that we should analyze. So let's try to make these moments that we will be sharing to make it true, because based on the Buddha teachings, and beneficial. And like this, we will be able to say that we are effectively involved in the activity of the Dharma. Let me just do a small scroll, because I always like to see who I'm talking with. So let me make a short introduction. From the traditional point of view, perspective, it is said that we need to create the ideal conditions in order to extract as much benefit as possible from the Dharma teaching. So in order to have the maximum benefit of Dharma teaching, we need to create the cause and conditions that are more favorable. The teachings say that even if we want to drink a simple cup of tea, we need causes and conditions, specific ones. We need, for example, a kettle or a place where we can heat up the water. We need water, we need heat, be it fire or electricity, and we need the herbs that will be making the infusion. And of course also a cup where we can drink the tea. If any of these components is missing, we can no longer drink tea. For example, if we don't have fire or electricity, it's going to be difficult to prepare tea. If we don't have where to heat up the water, we won't be able to make an infusion. And if we don't have the water, it's not possible to have a tea either. Or if we don't have the herb, we might be drinking hot water, but definitely not tea. So when we want to drink the nectar of the Dharma, also some ingredients are needed. And the first of them is our motivation. So in a simple way, because in today's teaching we will touch a little bit other aspects of the motivation. But the minimum motivation we should have now is the motivation of wanting to become a better person. And this is the foundational motivation. The highest one would be to attain realization and to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. So this is the motivation aspect. There it is said that from an appropriated motivation, we can move on to the perfect or conduct, knowing what to adopt and what to abandon. But if I keep going on into detail about what are the correct motivation, we will have a new teaching about that now. But now we can simply observe our own motivation. Because when we have a good motivation, the good conduct appears naturally, occurs naturally. For example, if we will go for dinner with someone, if we have a good sense of appreciation regarding the person that we are having dinner with, even if we have never learned many things about how to have a well-educated attitude when eating with someone, we will be quite pleasant, gentle, etc. But sometimes our motivation does not have the best root. There's a lot of Dharma teachings about what attitudes we should adopt and those that we should avoid. But everything comes from the correct motivation. So I will start by mentioning 3 things that we should abandon because they are accessory to having good motivation. Those are called the 3 effects of the plot. A recipient. It is said that there are 3 not good recipients that can be used in order to receive the Dharma teachings. One is called the cup turned upside down. For example, imagine that this is a cup or glass, and that is turned upside down, and no matter how much tea I want to put inside it, it won't work, right? So this is equivalent to when we are physically present, be it due to any social pressure or anything. So we are present at the teaching, but we are not paying attention, and therefore necessarily cannot receive the teachings. So this is the first attitude we should avoid. The second one is called the recipient or the cup with a small hole on it. So it does receive the liquid, the tea, but it doesn't retain it, right? So this is what happens when we are not really paying attention to the teaching. And maybe when a break arrives, and someone asks us about the teachings, we say, oh, it was very nice, very pleasant. But if you want to go deeper than that, we cannot recall any of what was said. And if we think that the only thing that we can put into practice is what we remember, that will be very little, right? So this is not a good attitude for listening to the teachings. But the last recipient is called, which actually is the most dangerous one, is called the poisoned cup. For example, has someone been drinking in a certain recipient soup or maybe some red wine, and this person forgets to clean this recipient, this cup, and then we go and use it for some tea. But suddenly, this tea will have the taste of this old red wine or soup. So, with this example, what we want is to remember that when we listen to the Dharma teachings with the wrong attitude or with the wrong motivation, for example, if you want to listen to the Dharma teaching only in order to have intellectual conversation, to play smart when talking with someone, or if I want to listen to the Dharma in order to make a career and to have my own center, in order to have a job. So this is not a good motivation to listen to the teaching. So these 3 attitudes are the ones we should avoid. On the other hand, there are 4 attitudes that we should have when listening to the teaching. The Buddha said, think about yourself as the sick person, the Buddha as the doctor, the Dharma as the medicine, and the Sangha and the diligent practice as the method to be applied. So I have to think about myself like this. I am sick. And what is my disease specifically? I'm in samsara. And what is the symptom of that disease? The existential suffering. So when we are approaching the Buddha or approaching a teacher, we are not approaching any miraculous person. And forgive me if I say this, but sometimes we really nowadays have too much expectation when approaching a teacher, a Dharma master. Because the doctor, his job is to prescribe the medicine. And the same happens with the Lama. He should diagnose properly and prescribe the adequate medicine. So we need to create the circumstances that are adequate to receive those teachings. Then the Dharma and the application of that the Dharma is the medicine, and the application of that medicine is what is actually going to cure us, right? Because even if we have a very nice doctor, and if I say I really like him, he's very, very nice person, and I love the medicine that he gives me because they have a wonderful packaging, everything is explained so well. But if I forget to take this medicine, the fact that I like so much the doctor or the medicine packaging, it's definitely not going to have the effect that I want. So the same happens with Dharma. To follow the instructions is the actual realization process. And there are other things, but as I said, if I go into everything, we won't be able to start the topic that has brought us here today. But just in order for you to be able to search for this, I will just mention that we should also avoid the 6 stains, which are 6 inner attitudes, in order to have a genuine, the 6 non-appropriated attitudes that avoid us to listen to the Dharma the way we should. And apart from the 4 attitudes that we have already mentioned that should be adopted, we should also cultivate the 6 perfections to the listening. The teacher should develop the 6 perfections in the teaching and the attitude in the listening to the teaching. And when we start the teaching, we traditionally recite some prayers, refuge prayer and bodhicitta. And so those of you that know these prayers, you can follow me. Otherwise, you just need to have this inner attitude. Or I can also translate them from the Tibetan to Portuguese if you want, or to English.正书八度断你将自性带给金属具备所能，多拉本性三界如法术。对我等对为就等对法主体，如能等如能听，如等对我主体，如能那个对我等法能明对我主体，如所等你等都为断了三昧帮我那法主体。对我等对为就等对法主体，如能等如能听，就等对我主体，如能那个对我等法能明对我主体。因为他有生命法王的法主体，对我能对为知道的法主体，都能等都能听，就算对我主体，都能那个对我的法能你对我主体，能说的你等到为多年之内法王的法主体。When in English, you can say, in the Buddha, in the Dharma, in the Sublime Sangha, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. By the virtues of generosity and the other parameters, may I become Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. The second one says, may all beings found happiness in the cause of happiness. May they all escape from suffering and the causes of their suffering. May we all never be separated from the happiness that never knows suffering, and may we have equanimity, not feeling attachment to some and aversion to others. So now I personally will make special prayer to the masters so that they give me their influence so that I can teach in the appropriate way and you can listen in the appropriate way. Constante penso come organizzação e lá nessa relação a inconsternagem chegou que me deu a chocar me chegou com necessidade de consulto que inundação do sul. So these are the short preparations that we do. So we're going to talk a little bit about this Lamrim. But before, let me tell you what is the purpose why I have been invited by our community to give this public talk. Because we will be starting a Lamrim program for people who actually want to gain experience of the Dharma teachings, or the teachings of the Buddha. I've noticed mainly in the West that it is very difficult to find someone who has a really structured practice. Sometimes they listen to a talk here, they read a book there, but often Dharma centers do not have the capacity to give a linear opportunity for people to study. So as I've said, we in the West we have this inconvenience. Since everything that we learn, especially nowadays, we have computer and everything, and where we can search for things, but that never can assure us that we are having the correct understanding. But even when we find people that have a quite good idea about what is the Dharma practice, they often don't know how to bring that into practice. So we need to understand that Buddha Dharma is not just a philosophy. So we can have two approaches to this. One that is less usual, one that comes from the simple, ordinary study that comes from the study, and another one is the understanding that comes from the experimenting things. So if we really want to understand the teachings, we need mainly the knowledge that comes from the experience and not just from the intellect. It's very interesting because in many areas of our lives, for example in the medicine, not always those students, medicine students that have best results during faculty are the ones that from the emergency room have the best performance, because the lack of experience might be a problem in different areas. Excellent theory person lack this capacity of experience. In the spiritual path, this is disastrous for us. So what happens nowadays, or more and more nowadays, is that when we have this approach, because we learn it, we've learned it like that, to study things, since we were children, right, when we went to school. And this capacity has been praised for centuries and centuries. But unfortunately, that does not necessarily mean the capacity to understand them or to experience them. So we can have the knowledge about the meditation practice, but the question is, do we have the fruit of that meditation practice? I know many people who teach meditation, but when they come privately to talk with me, they have the symptoms typical from those that do not practice meditation. So looking at this, and also looking at the context of many people that I know that go around the Dharma centers, go to some Dharma centers, but don't have a structured practice, we've created this Lamrim program. It is in conjunction with something that I've been talking a lot and that I've personally called sustainable Dharma. So the idea of not having transgenics in the practice, in our path, it's very important if you want to have a solid Dharma structure. So this program will take 2 years to be completed, not due to its conceptual difficulty or anything like that, but because those that will want to follow this program will be receiving specific instructions in order to redirect and correct their own practice. So these will be practical and quite direct instructions in order to do that redirection. So this will consist in individual practice, but also collective practices, so that people slowly, day after day, they can build up their meditation practice. As Nurek said, when you are hungry, it's not enough to talk about food, right? We also sometimes talk a lot about meditation, about spirituality, but very often that is comparable to wanting to eat and just being talking about food. And let me tell you, that's not good for me, for example, because believe me, I do like to eat. I prefer to eat instead of talking about food. Some years ago in France, there was this newspaper critic who was criticizing very toughly a certain restaurant. And because this restaurant, like any other, they had the right to reply. The guy from the restaurant had to reply saying that this critic person from the newspaper was just like all the others, were just like castrated animals. So we don't want to be that. We don't want to be only able to talk about something, but we also want to be able to take the benefits of that practice. So those that want to know more into detail what is the structure of this course, what will be the practice, you can get those information. But now I'm going to talk about mainly what will be the content of this program called Lamrim. So, and what is Lamrim? Lam is a Tibetan word that means path, and Rim means stages, or so stages of the path. So this kind of spiritual instruction started with a great Indian master called Atisha Dikankara Siddhyanu. But when it started with this structure, does not mean that Atisha has created this approach. This approach has a characteristic that has some specific main aspects. It's the understanding that all the Buddha teachings have no contradiction within themselves. Because nowadays we sometimes see this discussion that actually makes some sectarian views to arise, as if there was contradiction between the Hinayana, the Mahayana, or the Vajrayana and the wisdom. We can see a lot of discussions about what is more correct and what is less, what should be integrated and what should not. So Lamrim, the first thing that he's going to tell us is that all the teachings from the Buddha have no contradiction among themselves, and how also how we can integrate all the different stages of that path. It says that all the Buddha teachings are practical instructions. When we are not practitioners, sometimes we think, okay, this is a very interesting philosophy or theory, but how to bring that to practice? And knowing how to do that is exactly what Lamrim program is about. and understanding that none of those teachings are just the speculation talk or teaching. And this brings us to another quality of the Lamrim, which is to understand what is the intention behind the teachings. If we don't manage to understand what is the intention of a teaching, it's difficult to have an effective benefit coming from it. And so like this, we will start understanding that there is no mistake in the instructions and that they are all complementary from one another. So, in what is the origin, or what is at the base, at the origin of the Lamrim teachings? The teachings from the Buddha. And they have came from the three lineages, mainly. The lineage from the first, the links from Maitreya, Vajrabandhu, before that Buddha Shakyamuni, and then it came up to Atisha, and another lineage called the lineage from the profound vision that came from Buddha Shakyamuni to Manjushri, Nagarjuna, Chandrakirti, and to many masters up to Atisha. The lineage called of the vast facts or doings gives more emphasis, not exclusively, but gives more emphasis to what is called the activity of the Bodhisattva in terms of this aspect of the message. And the deep vision lineage puts more emphasis in the aspect of wisdom, what is sometimes called the wisdom of the absolute nature. So many masters have practiced this lineage, these lineages, but Atisha, there were two masters, Lamrim, many others, but these two were Lamrim and Antipa. And Lamrim was the main holder of the lineage of the vast fact, and the other teacher was the main holder of the other lineage. And Atisha received teachings from these two masters, and he realized how these two were complementary. So the Lamrim shows us that there is no contradiction between any of the teachings of the Buddha. I must say that I don't like that much the word Buddhism, because when we talk about an ism, it's quite limited. If you check on the dictionary, as I did, ism means a doctrine, a dogmatic doctrine, and it's indoctrination. But the Dharma, if we look into the Tibetan word, it means things as they are. So they are not a doctrine. If you are a little bit familiarized with some Buddha teachings, you will understand easily that impermanence is not a doctrine, it's not an ism, it's the reality as it is. So the teachings of the Buddha are not an ism, a doctrine, they are what a realized being, free from any conceptual or emotional obscuration attains. And that is the Dharma in its relative aspect and its absolute aspect. So I prefer to use the word Dharma and not so much the word Buddhism. And let me tell you that this reality is not more than, nor it is Asian. The reality is the reality. So it is very important that you look at it from this perspective. So Atisha, just like the Shakyamuni, was born as a prince in the Bengal region, but very young. He had a vision of a deity called Tara that tells him that he should not inherit the throne because he would be totally submerged in a lot of problems. And therefore he decided to follow the spiritual path of the Dharma. He then later had several masters, and all the great masters from that period, from the Tantric lineages in others. But again, due to a second instructions from Tara, he decided to follow the monastic path. And later on, Tara again tells him that you should go to Serna in order to receive some instructions from a master that had a very important lineage. So Atisha goes collecting all of these teachings until he meets Salipa, with whom he stays for 12 years before he goes back to India to teach. And I always like this story, people to know this story, because nowadays they have this idea that, okay, a weekend course is going to be enough for me to attend realization. And it's not that Atisha was intellectually limited or anything, and that's why he had to spend 12 years in order to understand the teachings. But that was the time that was needed for him to integrate those teachings. And after that time, the Dharma became part of, like stones, we can say. In India, you might know or not, there were 3 main Buddhist universities, true university cities. Unfortunately, they were destroyed during the Islamic invasions. But the first of them, a very important one, Nalanda, it was a huge city with thousands of people teaching and even more, thousands of people learning. And then Atisha was the main master of the University of Vikrashila, a very important master. I'm going to stop here for a while. In the meantime, in Tibet, and we are in the 11th century, the Buddhism had been implemented in Buddhism in the 8th century with the kings Triton Deksen, Chandrakshit, and Govindashi, and other great masters. But there was one king, several generations later, that thought that Buddhism was an important product and dangerous one for the Tibetan culture, because in case you don't know, before the arrival of the Dharma in Tibet, just in case you don't know, Tibet had conquered a great part of China, and it had become a great empire. But when the king started wanting to implement it as a Dharma country, this warrior side of the culture was decreasing, and therefore conquering territories became less of a priority. But for this king, Devadatta, this was not a good option. He wanted to go to the glorious previous times. So he decided the only way of doing it was to suppress and destroy the Dharma in Tibet. And when he managed, up to a certain extension, but after his death, because Tibet was very vast, very big, but remember, Tibet was bigger than Europe before the Chinese invasion. So different kings had to use different methods and masters in order to restore the Dharma in the country. And there was a master called Nari in a region, and this master was in a kingdom that was really interested in restoring the Dharma. But because the Dharma had been lost, there were 2 main groups in Tibet. Those of the most advanced Dharma teachings that were not in agreement with the other schools. So this king, Hanshukoi, and his nephew, they decided that they had to bring a great master like Atisha to Tibet in order to solve this division. But they were aware that in order to invite Atisha in the appropriate way, they had to collect gold and to create the auspicious circumstances so that Atisha would leave India and travel up to Tibet. Because as you can imagine, to travel from India to Tibet by that time was not like now. Even if India is much closer to Tibet, it is nowadays much easier to travel from Portugal, for example, to Tibet than from India by that time. So this king and this lama who wanted to bring Atisha, they've managed to accumulate this sumptuous offering that they hoped would show their interest and devotion to Atisha. But unfortunately, this king has been defeated afterwards by another king, and this new king, knowing that he had all of such a treasure, was of course interested in having it. So we wanted the gold that they have accumulated was enough to cover up to the neck of this new king. And he said, either you get me more up to cover my head, or I'm going to have to kill you. So the king, the defeated king, it said, okay, it's not worth to make such an effort only in order to save my life. So please don't accept this proposal from the other king, and simply take that gold and go and offer it to Atisha. And of course Atisha was very touched, pretty much touched by this story when he was told. So Atisha had a very strong connection with Tara, and one day had this vision from Tara, and she told him that if you go to Tibet, you will not come back. Your life and your vital energy will be spent there, and you will end up dying. And actually, earlier than if you stay in India. But once again, Atisha with his bodhicitta, he thought, okay, it's much more important to teach Dharma to the Tibetans than to live for another 10 years, extra 10 years. So he went to Tibet. And when he got to Tibet, this great master realized this conflict that existed by the fact that people could not understand that there was no contradiction among the teachings from the Buddha. So he prepared he prepared a text called the Lamp of the Past Stages. And he then started teaching what then became the first text of the bibliography of the Lamrim. So his tradition went through different masters. It's with the Kadampa tradition, but please do not make any mistake with some misuses of the word Kadampa that occur nowadays. Because the tradition from Atisha, being so humble as they were, and not wanting to get involved in any political conflict or anything, so therefore they never created their own school or their own monasteries. They were just living among other monasteries. And for this reason, the teachings from Atisha, they got defaults inside the other schools as well. Inside the English school, to which one we belong, to which we belong. One of the texts from Atisha No, one text written by Lamrim. It's one that came to Atisha to our school, and another one also written by Lamrim that came to Shkolia Limpa. But there is a very, very slight difference between one of this text and the other one. But many masters, disciples from this tradition, were also Nigmata masters, because things were not that compounded in Tibet. Generally, practitioners would receive teaching from different institutions and masters. In the Kaya tradition, the instructions of Atisha have entered via Gampopa, an extremely important master, was a disciple of the lineage of Atisha, and also from what is now called in the Cairo school, instructions of Europa, Naropa. In these instructions from Atisha have also entered the Sakyapa school. Nowadays, most people, when they talk about Lamrim, in case some of you have a more intellectual study of these things, and when I say intellectual or academic study, it can be even from the internet. So, those of you that have more of knowledge about this might think that the Lamrim comes from the Kadampa on the 14th century with Tsongkhapa comments. But what sometimes it is not said to us is that Tsongkhapa had to receive himself also those teachings. So I have seen some manuals from some schools that say that these teachings passed through Atisha, Dratompa, Geshe Sekawa, and up to Kadampa. And it's very weird that the Nigma masters within this lineage are never mentioned. So Tsongkhapa has received the teaching from Lamrim from a master called Lodrap, Notingelse, an extremely important master. But even before talking more about Namkha Gyaltsen, when he died, let me tell you that when he died, Tsongkhapa had so much devotion towards this master that he decided to buy his house and to cover it on gold. To cover it on gold. So this is the level of devotion that he had towards his master. All the walls were covered with gold, for example. And this is the devotion he had for Nandal Gyaltsen. So sometimes it's weird that the so-called followers of Tsongkhapa simply decide to ignore that this was the master that gave him this lineage. Therefore, we can understand that the Lamrim lineage that came through Tsongkhapa has the same origin in the Nigmapa and Atisha teachings. And apart from this historical origin, in the non-sectarian tradition of Tibet, called Hime tradition, there was a very important master of this tradition, Jamyang Khuntru. He wrote different texts, and among those commentary texts, the commentary about Atisha text. And Jamyang Khuntru is very related with the Kagyu tradition. So we can like this conclude that the Lamrim is profoundly connected with the Nigma tradition and the Atisha tradition, and not only to with one tradition. More recently, in the 19th century, the great yoga Tsongkhapa considered a millimeter of nowadays of his spirit, an excellent non-sectarian master. When he met his main teacher, the first instruction his master gave him was to practice Lamrim. Because Lamrim is an excellent practice to integrate the Sutra and the Tantra. So before introducing him to the specific tantric practices, his master taught him Lamrim. If the Tantra is the supersonic plane that takes us to realization, the Lamrim is the road on which this plane can take off. So even if you have a supersonic plane, it's useless if you don't have two roads for takeoff. The emanated scriptures of Manchusi have been written by these practitioners that together with some very, very humble practitioners were practicing for many years the Lamrim. So the idea of this course, it's not to do an very profound academic approach, but to have instructions about the experimental practices. And these practices, depending on the presentation, will be between 21 and 24 different variations. And the traditional way of practicing these instructions is to receive the instruction, the first instruction, to have some time to put it into practice, then to dialogue with our master in order to discover what is the benefits that we are getting from that instruction and from practicing it, and then to have an organic approach to the next one and the next one. And sometimes people don't like this organic approach. But this organic approach is not necessarily a contradiction to a more fast approach. Let me tell you the story, remind you of the story of the turtle and the rabbit. But sometimes people think that when they are in the abrupt path, they might take the same risk as the rabbit took. Because they might think that they are faster, but sometimes that the realization, the experience will not happen. But sometimes the idea of having knowledge, it's more presumption than anything else. Because I usually like to say, to play with the words, is that nowadays there is this new concept of not having concepts. But someone who has a true realization of non-conceptuality must necessarily have, or necessarily has, all the qualities of the path. Humbleness, easygoingness, etc. Compassion, empathy, humbleness, as I've said. So in someone where these characteristics or these qualities do not arise naturally with the practice, then we are talking about an artificial, created spiritual path. And in those cases are just like the rabbit that's convinced that he's going to be the winner of the race, decides to take a nap next to a tree. The turtle, on the other hand, with his systematic practice, with no illusion, but going step by step, he knows you will get it. So what is fast and what is slow depends a lot on what is the final result at the end. once a master told me something very beautiful. He said, before having met the Lama known as Kuno Rinpoche. So this is what the Rinpoche telling me. Before knowing Kuno Rinpoche, I had the idea that the tantric teachings were the highest ones, and then all these different levels up to the Hinayana teachings. But that was until Kuno Rinpoche told me that, according to the scriptures, that there's a certain logic on that. But according to the experience, the highest teaching is the one that works better for you. Because from the perspective of the experience of the individual, to be attached to the idea that this is very high, but if the person cannot extract a true benefit from it, it's useless. It's a little bit like someone who is very attached to the idea of eating only gourmet food, but if your taste is not capable of distinguishing gourmet food from ordinary food, what's the point? So if we were to create the gourmet challenge, like that Coca-Cola challenge that used to exist, and we put on one bottle very fine red wine, and on another bottle a very, very cheap and bad quality wine, I have serious doubts that if there are that many people that can actually distinguish between one and the other. So sometimes this kind of Dharma path can become a certain sort of vanity. So what is high for you is the high teaching is the one that works for you. And another thing that is very important, that when we say a very high teaching for you, that doesn't mean the one that gives you extrasensorial experiences or visions or any of that. What matters is your compassion, your simplicity, your humbleness grow. The fact that you are becoming more and more an easy, accessible person is what matters. Salvatore Rinpoche says in Conseil La Shalom that those that have a lot of visions and extra sensorial experiences, but don't have compassion, they are on the wrong path. Those visions are actually demon blessings. And what does it mean by demon blessings? It means that they are something that will put you away from the genuine path. So we don't practice in order to have paranormal experiences or any of that. As I said at the beginning, we practice in order to benefit all sentient beings, to guide them to realization. So we have to manifest these qualities of balance when facing in equanimity, when facing the different situations in life. Well, even when life is just very, very challenging, or when our life goes very, very well, we also need to have this compassion, humbleness. I like this expression in English, easygoing, an easygoing person, a person that is easy to deal with, that is not too demanding. So these are the signs of an authentic practitioner. Not the visions, not this very elaborated talk. I would say a certain gentleness, natural gentleness that irradiates. That's what the genuine practitioner is. So from this point of view, we should look for the teachings that actually help us to extract those benefits from the practice. As one of my teachers said, when we start practicing Dharma, we are like a white paper. Definitely some color has to appear. If the color of the quality of the Dharma does not appear. Either you're not practicing it in the correct way, or you're not practicing the teachings that you need. But the Dharma always has to bring some color on this white paper. Unfortunately, when we become more intellectual, some people even become worse people, because their vanity, their intellectual knowledge makes them more pride, more arrogant, very often more dysfunctional. But that's why Shantidev and many other masters say that in those cases it would have been better if this kind of people would have never came close to the Dharma. But as it happens with any other medicine, if the medicine is not taken in the appropriate way, it can be dangerous, it can be poisonous. The Dharma has a methodology, and the Lamrim are very precise and simple instructions that can actually turn us better people, better practitioners. One of the characteristics of Atisha when he got to Tibet is that he wanted the Dharma practice to come out of the intellectual monasteries, the monasteries. He didn't want the Dharma to keep being just theological or intellectual knowledge. And that's why his instructions are so simple to put into practice. They are a clear instruction to map, stage by stage. But in order to, but as I've said before, it's not just about acquiring or gathering ideas. It's like cooking. You need 3 stages in order to cook. It's good to taste the food, right? So like this, it's when you finally know that this is what I want to eat. If the only thing you do is to go to the internet and looking for Indian recipes, if you have no idea of what is the taste of Indian food, it's going to be very difficult to know if you're cooking Indian style food or not. So it is very important to have this first stage where you take note of the needed ingredients. The second stage would be to go shopping those ingredients. But the third one is to cook the food. The same way, for our progress, we need first of all to listen to the instructions, to listen to the Dharma instructions. It's like listening to the recipe. Secondly, we need to learn to reflect or to analyze the Dharma, and that would be union the ingredients. In order to get to the third stage, which would be to taste the recipe. So like this, we won't be tasting or wanting to taste the Dharma only by reading about the food of the Dharma. Because when we want to eat, the only thing that we do is reading more and more recipes. This will be helpful. But if we go through these stages gradually, we will be able to cook and to try the food and to eat good food. So please don't do a cook course in order to go to McDonald's afterwards. But many people do that. They have a lot of courses about spiritual practice. But when daily problems appear, we react as people that have never heard any spiritual class. That's equivalent to having done a course on cooking and then going to eat at McDonald's. I really enjoyed these images, I must say. So this is my proposal. It doesn't mean that it has to be your proposal. Actually, when I thought about this course, I thought about it for people that have been for a while within the Dharma, but that seem not to be extracting the benefits from the Dharma that they could. But if you are here today, it's because there was some connection. But if there are no causes and conditions specific for you to follow this program, it's okay. Then we will remain with this. I will remain with this aspiration that you can create a seed on you. So, but by talking about what Lamrim program is, what are the qualities of Lamrim, and what is the lineage, I think I was willing. I was wanting to give you the minimum information about it. So, if you have any questions, please feel free. So this course would be what? 1 week, 1 hour per week, or what? So for theory instructions, we would meet once a month, and we would meet a second time in the month for practicing collectively. And the idea is that people practice on a daily basis. Of course, we will open a channel for people to come up with questions and to talk with me in order to have clarified any doubts that might exist. So, so the idea is that we meet every 2 weeks on Mondays at 8 o'clock in the evening. I wanted to put it earlier, but for some people that are at work, it won't be more difficult. So, but it's not supposed to last more than 1 hour. And the daily practice will depend on the person. But I would say that it should be between 15 to 20 minutes of guided meditation. And as you gain experience, let me also tell you that Lamrim is divided into 3 stages. And that is also different from the official instructions of the Lamrim that other schools don't have. Because the official directed his instructions to 3 kinds of different people. The ordinary people that just want to have immediate happiness, and have some well-being. And then it says there are some ordinary people that are more unusual and common. And those are the ones that care about what will happen when they die. So they want to have a good life, but also a good rebirth. But they continue in the same logic of wanting to be happy in samsara. So Atisha starts by directing his teachings to these kind of people. What qualities from the Dharma do they need to integrate in order to have a good life, to die well, and to have a good rebirth? The second scope of people, it's called the medium scope people. And those are people that have understood through their practice and their wisdom that it is not possible to encounter genuine happiness within samsara. So they generate, or they want to generate, this determination to be free, this deep aspiration for freedom. Sometimes in the West, there is this translation, but it's maybe not the best one, but it's this sense of urgency. The sense of urgency is very often in the West poorly translated by renunciation. But renunciation is definitely not a good word because it has a lot of other connections previous to this one in our culture. So you can be someone from the basic scope or the medium scope or the higher scope. Or you can start with the scope from the minimal scope, but if your realization already belongs to the medium or superior scope, as it is said in 37 practices from the Bodhisattva, there is no advantage in attaining realization if all of our mother sentient beings remain within samsara. So every time one of these stages of schools is concluded, people will be invited to do a retreat, be it presentially or online, guided, in case the COVID doesn't allow us to do it here at the retreat center. And then, one by one, with each teacher, I might be recommending that the sessions be a little bit longer or more with this and this aspect. So it should be tailored according to each one, because this religio food, of spiritual food that is usually given nowadays, I think it doesn't work. Because if we give too many things for people to practice, it doesn't work. People will end up frustrated. So we have to go step by step slowly. Of course, it should be a little bit challenging, but not too much. And this is going to be pretty much the case of a student-master conversation. Because if some people, if I say you're going to do a 10 minutes meditation, that will be a joke, because the person maybe nowadays already meditates much more than that. So it's about a good dynamic between the teacher and the student, each student. So that means, Lama, that you will be giving individual instructions. So what I meant is that I will be giving the same instructions to everyone, but then the needed adjustments will be made according to each one, if necessary. So this program will be starting in March. But as I've said, we will have a theory instruction once a month, and 2 weeks later, a collective or group session. And the idea will be, as we did in other programs, to have the recordings of the meditation for you to use at home. So we will be giving you all the needed support. And we will also have, as I've said, this hotline for you to come up with your questions. So the first class will be on Monday, the 7th of March at 8 p.m. But think about it. I want to say something that we can find in Bodhicharyapattara by Shantideva, which is that it is better not to assume any compromise than to fail on following them. I don't want to put any pressure on any of you. Every time we break a promise, a compromise, this is mainly bad, not because you were not doing what you said you would be doing, but mainly it is very, very dangerous because you will start losing the trust on yourself. So when you lose confidence on yourself, that is very detrimental to your life and to your spiritual path. So please, you have until the 7th of March to think. And if you decide to do this program, then that means a compromise of 2 years. And I prefer to tell you straight away because I'm not a salesman. I'm not a missionary either. So I want you to really reflect and think about it. And if you have questions, come up with them. It's okay. But don't look at it, please, as an ordinary hobby. I'm not a hunter of students, believe me. Any other questions? And thank you for the first question. I'm always glad when there are questions coming up. Lama, could you please say what is the book that we will be using for the study? Okay, the books are actually two. One will be the commentary of Jamgan Konsul on the Atisha text, and the other one are the scriptures emanated from Manjushri, from Shrapkar. But we are not going to follow those texts. What I'm going to do is to extract the instructions in a sense, a simple way from those texts. Okay, I was speaking in Spanish. But as I said, I don't want people to be studying text. I want to extract the instructions. Because, for example, the text from Shatkar is very interesting. The way it appears, it's very, very interesting. Shatkar at some stage decided to do a retreat of several years. And some of his more closest disciples decided to stay living around the hut where he was doing his retreat. And they wanted to have some teaching from time to time. But some of his, when we are doing very strict retreats, people cannot see the person that is on retreat, nor can this person see the others outside. So we had a very small window, and from time to time, people would be coming close to that window, and he would be giving some teachings, very simple ones. So if that is similar to what I want to do, I will be saying, okay, try to reflect on this aspect, on this, and now reflect on this. So as Atisha said, may we all be able to meditate on the same grounds without any exaggeration or anything. So we don't have to have any special inclination or easiness in practicing. We just need to want to learn how to practice. For example, regarding driving, I was never very good at that, but at some stage I had to get my driving license. So I simply went and learned. So there's people who are more tuned with driving and others that are less, but they can all learn, taking more time or less time. And the same happens with practicing. So it doesn't matter if you think you are very, you have an inclination for spiritual path or not. With these instructions, everybody can follow the path. So the kind of practices that we will be receiving will it be deity practices or more Shine practice? So as I've said, we'll have 21 meditations. They are a preparation for the Tantra, but as you will see, they are not tantric meditations. So they won't be that much focused on visualization, but they have more to do with the style of meditation that is more based on the sutras, more based on what is called the Qigong and Jogong. Qigong is what we can call analytical meditation, and Jogong is knowing how to position your mind and how these two can be supportive to each other, one to the other. And this is the departure point for our mind to finally start assimilating those principles. And these 21 themes or subjects are extremely important. For example, in the case of standard that you have been studying for a while, the Dharma, within these instructions you have what you know is called the 4 thoughts that change the mind. Because the 4 thoughts that change the mind are extremely important. For example, I cannot know by looking at someone how many mantras this person has recited, or nor can I, but I can do, looking at the options that this person does in his life, know if he has meditated enough or not on the 4 thoughts that change the mind. Very often people focus more on the inner preliminary practices because those are the ones that have numbers to accomplish. But very often they don't give enough emphasis to the external preliminary practices. And that's why their practice is so unstable. Because whenever the minimum problem arises within their work, life or anything, all of our pretentiousness about being a person following the Dharma path, they just disappear. So these essential practices for making our Dzogchen or Tantra or whatever practice to help us to deal with our daily life challenges. Because if that doesn't happen, then this is just a hobby. And because I'm getting old, as I like to say, let's not make this a hobby for bored bourgeoisie. It is important that the Dharma becomes something alive, something that germinates on us and really transforms us. So we need instruction, even if simple ones, that have this power of changing us, especially when more esoteric and teachings don't have that capacity. Because sometimes the problem is not the teaching, it's our lack of capacity to understand the teachings and to apply those teachings. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes, my attention to things that are more mundane, sometimes I like to watch the Voice. And sometimes the tutors, they say that more is less. And that's true, because sometimes they try to do something very elaborated, sing in a very exaggerated way, and they lose impact, especially if you don't do it with excellency. So the exoteric, extremely elaborated practices can be more, but become less. So sometimes when you sing, just like with when you sing less, but in a beautiful way, that has more impact. So the same happens with the Dharma. Very simple instructions can sometimes really create an imprint in our lives. People couldn't care less if you can talk in a very elaborated way about the Dharma and philosophy or anything. All that people want is to know if you are capable and if they are capable to be more resilient, more calm, more peaceful. That's what really matters. The rest is, recruitment talk, bullshit. To talk about very esoteric things. Actually, it can be a huge problem. It can create exaggerated expectations in people because it creates exaggerated expectations about what will be the results and about what are our capacity. So it doesn't matter if we cannot cross walls. Because until we manage to cross the walls of the density of our ideas, the rest doesn't matter. Because if there is a problem in the health of your children and you can maintain your equanimity, that's what matters. If there is problems within your society and you can remain a safe force, that's what matters. Because very often with all of that esoteric talk, all you develop is the exalted approach. So someone is asking if there is any problem in participating now that this person is living in France. Thanks to Zoom, Lana is answering, no, definitely not. Years ago, that might have been a problem. Either would have to go to France or you would have to come to Portugal. But nowadays, thanks to technology, there's a certain blessing in having these technologies. Imagine what this pandemic would have been without having technology. So even with this pandemic, even the more scared ones, we can keep talking with our families. And although I'm not a great, although I'm not too much in favor of Dharma through the internet, these are the circumstances that we have right now, so we have to use them. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm a weird Lama because I'm not a monk. I am a family father, which is excellent for my spiritual practice because they always allow me to see at what level I am. Because it's easy to talk about non-conceptuality, non-duality, and a lot of other qualities, but when you have children jumping all over, it's easy to see where you actually are. So if there's no more questions, we can dedicate to merit in a simple and modern way in order to reaffirm the synapses of compassion and wisdom that we have created and to make them even stronger. This is my pseudo-scientific explanation of it. So we have these seeds and we need to dedicate to merit in order for them not to be finished. So we'll do the prayer and then I will translate it from Portuguese and the translators into their own language. Non ambitam sivitantanene tedenam tantanene kegana shrivala tuta. Sipe tole doa doa shu sensu rigo shri maki pana kegi shri kepa yupa meha kone gundu bewa shu. By the merit now accumulated, may all beings defeat their true enemies, the three persons, and may the beings tormented by the waves of samsara attain the beach of samsara, of realization. May the precious and sublime bodhicitta be born in those that it has not been born yet, and in those that it has, may it grow in increments more and more. Let me just tell one last thing. This kind of instructions is definitely not for people that want to learn meditation just in order to feel a little bit better. Of course, that kind of meditation also exists, but this kind of instructions is for those that want to guide their lives via the Dharma. If all we want is to get calmer, there are also instructions for that, and it's excellent if we start with that. But these are not the instructions for that. So thank you very much for all of your patience. I must say that I don't know if I would have as much patience as you to listen to myself. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.